So now we dive a little bit more into the exercises. So two players from the Sydney FC Academy came down and did these exercises with us. So having the Nordic straight up as an example. So if you are worried about soreness or anything like that, you can easily start them banded, for example, to regress them a little bit. But this is also a great opportunity that if a player was injured, to bring them back into the team program and just start with a regress sort of version, for example. But you can see here, like both these boys, they're 14, 15 years old, so they're doing these sort of things with a pretty decent technique.
Yep. Yeah, and what would you say? Like, let's talk in season. I know we talked a bit about the work from Presland before. Let's just think about the in season competition. What would in terms of sets and repetitions here? We're sort of looking at. I know Presland did once per week 2 sets of 4. Would that be something consistent that you guys would do with your athletes as well, or do you sort of add a couple more reps there for a bit of extra performance?
I think Stella's with Sydney FC, the work there, again, it comes down to buy-in. They're getting up to like 3 sets of 15 2 or 3 times a week, so there was massive volumes.
In season?
In season.
Yeah,
so like we were able to get them to, and like with the injury surveillance, so there was no obvious issues around hamstring injuries or fatigue-related components as well. Yeah. That probably would be a gold standard, I guess. In terms of being able to get that done with all the other work that goes into getting that done. In terms of what we get done, say, the local team, the clubs that we roll similar systems out to, like we'll get up to 3 sets of 10 twice a week done through the whole season, no problem.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, but that it takes work to get to that. But I would say if you're going to roll it out to start with, I often just start 1 set of 3, or 1 set of 2, because at least you got to get over that fear. And I guess this comes down to conversation. Everyone has different opinions on Nordics, but Nordics is supposed to be a super maximal exercise. It's not supposed to be easy.
Yeah.
And I know it's very popular to see those exercises where people can hold it all the way down and come all the way back up.
Yeah.
There's an argument if you can do that, you need to add weight to make it harder. So I think we need to be not rigorous, but we need to be very clear on what the purpose of an exercise is. Yeah. And go look at that. 1 is better than 0, so start them off early and then progress them. And if we can be cheeky and get more in, then great. If we don't, and like you say, we've got that back up with Presland's work around. Yep. We can get away with 2 sets of 4 if you've done the hard work in the pre-season.
Yep.
And again, I think it comes in as well what you match a schedule like. If you suddenly have midweek games or anything like that, going back to your minimum dose will be fine to maintain that throughout a few weeks. But if you then get a bit of a rest period or Christmas break, anything like that, then that's the opportunity again to bring in more repetitions, more sets, and build that back up.
Yeah, cool.
So next, just some bridges, double leg, single leg. Again, something to complement that hamstring work. We've said it already, Nordic isn't the one exercise, but I think again, if a player is to get injured, to get that good hamstring loading in the meantime as well can help to sort of tell them to do that at home if they're doing the Nordics, for example, at training, and just complement that. Yep. And even a bit of a combination of like some single leg sort of stability with the RDL sort of movement. But yeah, Taj is a little bit annoyed here that he messed that up. But that can just be really good for a youth player as well to try and combine these movement patterns a little bit.
Yeah, and it's good. I like the first couple that you've shown here. I like how the partners, you get that partnership with the Nordic, and certainly as you go through to the Copenhagens, no doubt, and some of the other exercises and the bumps and all that kind of stuff. It's that partnership that you have that can build camaraderie within your team, and then you can sort of mix it up and get players to know each other a little bit more. And it's not always the same 2 people sort of partnering up all the time. You can be a coach and do those kind of stuff. I like that, but also I like this one here with the ball. Every club, every sport, it doesn't matter what sport you're in, they want to have a ball in their hands or a racket in their hands or something in their hands. So to bring that ball in while they're doing the arabesque or the RDL, it's a really sort of nice way, even if they're not a goalkeeper, it's a nice way to sort of bring that in and sort of give them that sporting context into the exercise.
Yeah, what you were saying is the partner work is sort of great to see as well. Like as they're sort of even correcting each other, like, you know, as boys do, but Josh, you've got to keep your hips up, what are you doing? You know, like things like that is then really good to see that they're actually correcting each other.
Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, now we're coming to the Copenhagen, so your level 1 to level 2 that you can do with a partner, or, you know, if you're doing it at home, just use a chair. Level 3 even in the eccentrics as well. Yeah. And I think it's a great example to show that even at that age they can do that, they can progress to that.
And I think with the Copenhagens as well, like there's still a lot we don't know, like around, and in some ways we don't know 100% why Nordics are so successful. Yeah. And the same with the Copenhagens, that they target, obviously there's a large volume that goes across, but we don't. I think there's an advantage of getting younger kids doing them as well, obviously within pain range and all those sorts of things, but we don't know the adaptive benefits of starting something when younger. Is it protective when they're older? We don't know these things yet. So given the neural input into a lot of these issues, potentially, but at the same time, I think introducing them and not being too scared of some of these exercises, I think is really important.
Yeah, and kids are, you know, generally blank canvases, you know, these exercises here are generally self-limiting too. They'll either do it or they won't. And certainly if it's a young soccer player with groin pain, adductor-related groin pain, they, you know, like if they can do it, let them do it. If they're getting a 0 to 2, like what we've done there with the, you know, in your last section where we talked about the Copenhagen squeeze test, and if they're okay to train within a 0 to 2, and we don't have to modify too much. Like it's okay to have a bit of discomfort. And this is where the Copenhagen's a really good exercise. You know, like if they're, you know, 0 to 2 out of 10 discomfort, let's, you know, do the full shebang. But if they're getting some discomfort greater than 3 and beyond, then we might have to modify it to make sure the reps are being done. So this is where, like, the modifications here, the Copenhagen, are going to be really powerful to allow players to continue to get the good, meaningful work in. Then if it's still too sore, take another step back and go to that lower modified version where they're lying on their side and just simply adducting up against gravity. And that's where I think as health professionals and physios, sport trainers, athletic trainers, wherever you are in the world watching this one, modifying the exercise is really important, not just sort of, if they can't do it, rubbing it out and sitting them out altogether. Find a way that they can actually do the exercise to keep them on the park. I think is really important.
Yeah, I think with the Copenhagen in particular, the simple one is there, just shorten the lever down. So that top leg on the chair, if you put the knee more closer there, then that takes that potential load down. So I think there's, like you say, I think not being scared to, if you modify an exercise, you still use your clinical reasoning as to why, what you can do. You can make something harder or easier, progress, keep touching base. And if it's too easy, make it harder. If it's too hard, make it easier. So I think that clinical knowledge there is important. And sometimes the messaging around some of these exercises, and we're probably guilty for as well, that you have to do these exercises, but don't be scared to modify if you need to get to where you need to get to.
And I think as well in general, if you get them started early, it sort of becomes the norm as well. So sometimes I'm really surprised, but then a 13, 14-year-old comes to training and goes, Stella, I haven't done this exercise. Do I go home and do it then? Like after training, I'll have to brush off, my mum has to go. And then you just go like, yeah, sure, go and do that, you know. So they're pretty sort of switched on with these sort of things, and it's always good then to make them understand that if you're continuing that, you're pretty well off sort of in that sense.
Yeah.
So the next one was sort of some internal and external rotation of the hip. Can be used more obviously sort of in the rehab setting if you can't get weight bearing or that's too painful for the player. But some good sort of again regress sort of exercises that you can go through.
And again, I think there's always discussion around clams. Well, there's been more recently. I think sometimes these ones get done poorly, and I think it's continuing to these ones. We probably want to focus a bit on fidelity of how that gets done. Yeah. But I think in terms of, especially for developing athletes, getting them sometimes the control that they struggle with, so that little inner range sort of movement is actually quite nice for them to do. Yes. And it may not necessarily make them objectively stronger, but getting them aware of what their rotators of the hip do and having this conversation can be quite important when you start to talk about landing mechanics and turning your hip out and knee out. So I think we start to then build the picture for them as well. So there's more sometimes than just perfect big strength. It's also body awareness and body control as well.
So the squats to toe raise and lunges, you really want to just look for that knee alignment, I guess, that we've sort of touched on before. There's some great exercise, obviously, to strengthen sort of your hips and quadriceps and calves, but it should just be a constant sort of cueing on keeping the knee sort of in line with the hip and your feet.
Yeah.
Using Taji as an example, as he's sort of coming up and pushing up, just making sure that his knees don't sort of come in that last little bit would be a good cue for him.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's it. That's a really important one. Like I think something like a lunge, something like a squat, and I think as much as, we probably want to be careful about screening and over cueing and all those kind of things, we do know there certainly are some trends with movement behaviours that lead to injury. Like, you're not going to tear your ACL doing a lunge poorly, but certainly you, well, I hope not anyway, I've never seen it, never read about it, but you'll certainly will, if we're not trying to improve these movement qualities, I think we can sometimes, we can allow those players, unfortunately, to get into a bit of strife. So if we see something really high risk, even though we may not be able to perfectly predict whether or not anything will happen in the future, I think we'll all sleep better at night knowing that this person is moving better to help their performance and certainly reduce their risk of injury from occurring. And certainly if you see these big, when they're lunging, when they're squatting, and they see this knock-kneed appearance and they're seeing that lunge and their hips dropping in, I think they're the important cues we probably need to pull up some of these kids. Whether or not that'll actually save them from an ACL injury in the future, we don't know. But certainly from a performance point of view and a movement efficiency point of view, it'll certainly help a lot.
Yeah, and I think as well that, just having an eye for how these movement patterns change, like you can see, for example, Taj's his leg length is a lot longer compared to his upper body sort of height. So with his hands on his hips, you can even just see that. You don't necessarily need to do any measurements of that. So just knowing that most likely he's going through a bit of a growth spurt, or he has recently, then looking for how these movement patterns change within that time is really important.
Yep.
So with your trunk strength, going through your different plank variations, front plank, you can just hold it, keep alternating your legs, keep one leg up at a time for a certain amount of time. With your side planks, you can just hold it, hips up and down, lifting your legs up. Another thing that is really important with this one is really keeping your neck straight as well, to add a little bit of that neck strength. But I think, Jack is doing a pretty good job here of these different variations. So a few other variations that could be more applicable to the goalkeepers, with more single arm strength as well, or shoulder strength. Good sort of variations to your planks that's in there already anyways. Same with your band work as well, that you could add in for goalkeepers. The 11 plus shoulder program is obviously great. You can go back to that. It has some shoulder rotation in as well. It is a quite lengthy program, so even if you just pick a couple of exercises and bring some variations to it for your goalkeepers, just to make it that little bit more specific.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what I love about, especially the videos that you got here, the plank position, rolling the ball, and you got the rubber band. Once again, nice partner work. Quite motivating there for the athletes. They can, you can make a little competition of it. You can certainly add some more resistance to it. But that's the beauty of the program. All it takes is a rubber band or a ball or a partner. But now we've got an effective program. I think sometimes we have to have, sometimes think we've got to have all the equipment, we've got to have gym access, we've got to have all these bits and pieces of equipment. Like, a really good program should be done with as little equipment as possible. and what we're sort of putting forward here are highly effective exercises that will help, strength, control, neuromuscular, coordination, all these important things that will help performance. So very simple things done relentlessly well will certainly trump a lot of other things that are hard to do or have barriers or never get done. Exactly.
So next we're just looking at some squat jumps, some lateral jumps. Obviously great to sort of work on some power, but again, we really want to watch for that knee alignment with the hip and the knee, and try and cue that as sort of a continuous process while they're doing the exercises. And if they're, for example, doing it at home, have a session every now and then. Like, let's say it's rained out and you can't train, we'll go through the program and have a look how they've been doing the exercises, or things like that. Just ask them every now and then when you get a chance to see how they're performing these exercises. So just give them a few little tips on how to improve it.
Yep.
Your single leg stands, you can obviously bring plenty of variation to that. The bar throw is one. You can do some wrestling, where they're either holding onto the hand or to a board together, trying to push each other over, which again can with competition makes it more exciting for the player as well. But definitely an extremely important sort of exercise, just to bring it back to basics as well, I guess.
Yep.
So if we're then looking at a little bit more sort of that change of direction running based technique work. So we're having Jack here changing direction with his left and with his right foot. We've talked about screening. We can take videos before the season starts and maybe analyze them, but we know that from the work in previous research, that's maybe not the best way to even predict anything. So if we can just have a chat to the player and see like just little details that we might maybe want to educate the player on in that situation, for example, whether Jack can just place his foot a little bit closer to the center of mass, and explain to him that, for example, if we're looking at the pictures of the first ground contact, that he has that slight sort of toeing out with the likely sort of external tibial rotation. So that brings like his knee into sort of a relative knee valgus. How much we can sort of change with that is questionable, but we can try to just focus on hip strength and maybe just change his first ground contact there a little bit. And again, that can be just a conversation during the warm-up. You're seeing them sort of do that. You just quickly pick them out to say, maybe just try that and try and implement these sort of slight changes on a regular basis.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that's when you're in the chaos of sport, when you're in the chaos of training environments, you sort of really want to allow your body just to, be automatic and do the things that it would automatically do. And this is what, a good training program will do, like, the Perform Plus, 11 Plus, any kind of strength and conditioning work, any jumping landing training. It's trying to sort of, I guess, take control of a little bit of that stuff where you can sort of take the time to think about how you're jumping, how you're cutting, how you're landing, so that your body's probably better adapted for that. So that when the chaos comes on with sport and you've got challenges of defending, attacking, and the fatigue that creeps into the game, you just want your body then to go into autopilot and just do what it does, knowing that we've done some work already in the background to help reduce our risk as much as possible. And like you said, those little cues I think will be really powerful. So if you can see someone really throw their leg out in a training drill that's very slow paced and very late, very slow, and they're throwing their leg out in this really risky way, I think that's the appropriate time to say, let's see if we can improve your cutting performance, and say, let's try and strike underneath you a little bit, and talk to them about performance about that, rather than say, well, if you do this cut like this way, we're going to reduce your ACL injury risk. Some people might sort of like that, but most of them will want to hear that if they strike underneath them, they'll be quicker off the mark, or they'll zip past their opponent a bit better, yet we're going to reduce their risk of injury too. So it's just using that clever language and that more positive language, I think, is really important here.
And I think this is where, as physios, we almost need to put our coach hat on rather than our clinician hats, because I think we're very good at prescribing and almost dictating what happens, and rather than looking at how do we get, like, so if we say someone like Jack, who has some biomechanical challenges there, but we're kind of vaccinated. Everyone's doing the same drills, but that then allows us to identify those ones that are struggling, or potentially we need to do more coaching work with. And so they're getting the dose, but we shouldn't be necessarily happy with just getting a dose out. We want to perfect the dose and do that work. So having that coaching language around, go, all right, drop a bit back, do a bit of this, and then use that as a challenge for us as clinicians to explore that part that we're probably feel a bit vulnerable doing, because we're good at telling people, but maybe not necessarily showing. And then making sure that we think as a coach sometimes as well.
Yeah. And that probably goes in really well with the next video there, Stella, where it's you've now broken down that probably little movement area, and now you're getting the boys to actually hop forward and stick and get their body in a better position there. I think that's that kind of stuff's really important. If you see something, got to come up with a drill to try and change it. So.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting then to see as well with the next video how it actually changes once you bring that contact in.
Yeah.
So that, like the landing is not optimal anymore necessarily, but that it's just really important to train those drills and have them in the warm-up, for example, to identify that, but also just really to let the boys keep practicing that, or like any player, obviously, so that where Taj, for example, gets bumped over there a little bit more, he's fine landing a bit more on his right foot, like these sort of strategies that they just implement them and find them themselves as well.
Yep, and as you pointed out in the first or second section, where it's when players, an ACL injury risk is going to be in soccer players. It's going to be maybe in a mid-air collision when they're going up for a header and they're landing. These are the reasons why we're introducing drills like this, to try and at least expose the players to these little bumps and perturbations in a safe and semi-controlled way, in a low-risk way. Certainly taking that risk versus reward scenario here. We've got to give them a little bit of exposure to make them adapt and toughen up, so that when it does actually happen in sport, they're prepared a bit better for it. So that, using these drills quite cleverly too is really key.